Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Mike Garrett, and I used to think ghosts were just stories people told to explain things they didn't understand. Wind through old buildings, branches scraping on roofs, the way your mind plays tricks when you're scared or sad. I wish I still believed that. I've been a park ranger at Mount Rogers for 6 years now. It's the highest peak in Virginia, all 5,729 feet of it, covered in thick forests and dotted with old mountain homesteads that families left behind decades ago. The government bought out most of the mountain folks in the 1960s to make the recreation area. Now all that's left of their lives are stone foundations and crumbling chimneys scattered through the woods. Before I became a ranger, I worked with kids, social services. I was pretty good at finding missing children, bringing them home safe. Maybe that's why I ended up here, in a job where I still help people, just in a different way. Or maybe it's because of Sarah. Sarah's my daughter. Was my daughter. She's still alive, but her mother got full custody 3 years ago, moved to California. I get to see Sarah 2 weeks every summer, and that's it. The judge said my job was unstable, and that bouncing around from case to case wasn't good for a child's development. Funny thing is, Sarah loved hearing about my work. She'd sit on my lap and listen to stories about finding lost hikers or helping scared kids. She said she wanted to be a ranger too when she grew up. I keep her picture in my wallet. She's 8 now, gap-toothed smile, pigtails that never stay straight. Sometimes when I'm walking these mountain trails, I pretend she's with me, asking a million questions about everything we see. The storm hit Mount Rogers on December 15, 1983. Weather Service called it a once-in-a-generation blizzard. 3 feet of snow fell in 18 hours, with winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Temperatures re-dropped to 10 below zero. Power lines came down like dominoes, and every road leading up the mountain got blocked by fallen trees and snowdrifts. I was supposed to be off duty, but the storm trapped me at the ranger station along with 2 other rangers, Bill and Janet. We had enough food for maybe a week, plenty of firewood, and a battery-powered radio that crackled with emergency reports from all across southwest Virginia. The storm was so bad that helicopter rescue was impossible. We were completely cut off from the outside world, and so was anyone else still on the mountain. Our job was to wait it out and then start searching for any hikers or campers who might be in trouble. On the 3rd day, the wind finally died down enough for us to venture outside. The world looked like something from another planet. Snow had piled up to the windows of the ranger station. Trees that had stood for 100 years lay broken like matchsticks. Everything was white and silent and still. That's when we got the radio call. "This is Charlie Michaels," the voice crackled through the static. "My wife and I were cross-country skiing near the old Garrett settlement when we heard—" Well, this is going to sound crazy, but we heard kids playing, laughing and carrying on like it was summer instead of the middle of a blizzard. Bill grabbed the radio. "How many children, Charlie? Did you see them?" "That's the thing," Charlie said. "We never saw anybody. Just heard them clear as day. Sounded like maybe 4 or 5 kids playing some kind of game. Ring around the rosy, maybe." We called out, but they didn't answer. Then the wind picked up and we had to head back. I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. The Garrett settlement had been abandoned for over 20 years. Nobody lived up there anymore. The old cabins had been falling apart for decades, and this storm would have finished them off for sure. But kids playing in the snow? In this weather? In that isolated place? "We need to check it out," I told Bill. "If there are children up there, they're in serious danger." Bill nodded, but I could see doubt in his eyes. Charlie Michaels was a good man, reliable, but the storm had everyone on edge. Maybe he'd heard wind whistling through broken timbers. Maybe his imagination had gotten the better of him. I loaded my pack with emergency supplies, cold weather gear, and enough food and water for 2 days. I strapped on snowshoes and checked my compass. The Garrett settlement was about 5 miles from the ranger station, through some of the roughest country on the mountain. As I prepared to leave, Janet grabbed my arm. "Mike, be careful up there. Something about this doesn't feel right." I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. All I could think about was Sarah and how scared she'd be if she was lost in the woods during a storm like this. If there were children up at the old settlement, I was going to find them and bring them home. I should have listened to Janet. I should have trusted that cold feeling in my stomach. But I didn't, and by the time I realized my mistake, it was way too late. The hike to the Garrett settlement took me 3 hours through snow that came up to my knees. My snowshoes helped, but I still had to stop every few hundred yards to rest and check my direction. The storm had changed the landscape so much that familiar landmarks were buried or knocked down. I found Charlie's ski tracks about halfway there, already half filled with wind-blown snow. They led through a grove of pine trees and up a steep ridge that overlooked the settlement. I could see why Charlie had been up there. It was one of the few places where you could get a good view of the old homestead. The Garrett place had been home to 3 families back in the day, according to the historical records. 3 cabins clustered around a small clearing, with root cellars dug into the hillside for storing vegetables and preserves through the long mountain winters. The families weren't related to me, despite sharing my last name, just one of those coincidences that happen in small mountain communities. What I saw when I reached the ridge made me stop dead in my tracks. The storm had been brutal to the old settlement. 2 of the 3 cabins had collapsed completely under the weight of snow and falling trees. The 3rd was missing half its roof. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the sounds. Even from a quarter-mile away, I could hear them clearly. Children's voices, laughing and calling to each other. The sound of running feet crunching in snow. Someone singing what sounded like an old nursery rhyme. I stood there for a long time, listening and watching. But I couldn't see anyone moving around the ruins. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I made my way down into the settlement, following a path that should have been completely buried, but somehow stayed clear of snow. As I got closer, the sounds got louder, more distinct. "Ready or not, here I come," a girl's voice called out. "No fair, you peeked," another child complained. "Did not." "Did too." The argument dissolved into giggles and the sound of small feet running through snow. I reached the edge of the clearing and cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hello, is anyone there? This is Park Ranger Mike Garrett." The sound stopped instantly, like someone had turned off a radio. I waited, listening to my own breathing and the drip of melting snow from broken timbers. Then, very softly, I heard whispering. "A ranger. He has the same name. Maybe he's come to play." The voices were so quiet I wasn't sure if I'd really heard them or just imagined them. I took a step forward into the clearing. That's when I saw the footprints. They were everywhere in the snow around the ruined calves. Bins, small prints, child-sized, but something was wrong with them. They were too deep, like whoever made them weighed much more than they should have, and they were perfectly preserved, even though snow had been falling for the past hour. I followed the prints to what was left of the largest cabin. The roof had caved in, but the stone foundation was still solid. I could see where someone had cleared snow away from what looked like a cellar door set into the hillside behind the house. "Hello?" I called again. "If someone's down there, you need to come out. It's not safe." No answer, but I thought I heard movement from somewhere underground. A soft, scraping sound, like small hands brushing against stone walls. I approached the cellar door carefully. It was made of thick oak planks bound with iron, the kind of door that could keep a root cellar cool in summer and from freezing in winter. Someone had definitely been here recently. The snow around the door was disturbed, and the heavy wooden bar that held it shut had been moved aside. I pulled the door open. Warm air rushed out, carrying the smell of apples and cinnamon and something else I couldn't identify. Something sweet, but wrong, like flowers left too long in water. The cellar was much larger than it should have been, extending back into the hillside farther than seemed possible. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with mason jars and wooden crates. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was that it felt like spring down there. The temperature had to be at least 70 degrees. There was no heat source I could see, no fireplace, no lantern, nothing. But the air was warm and humid, and I could hear the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. "Is anyone down here?" I called into the cellar. This time I got an answer. "Come and play with us," a child's voice called from deep in the shadows. "We've been waiting so long for someone new." Every instinct I had told me to turn around and walk away. But if there were children down there, children who had somehow survived in this impossible warm space while a blizzard raged outside, then I had to help them. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped into the root cellar. The beam of my light revealed shelves lined with preserved food that should have spoiled decades ago. Apples that looked fresh-picked. Jars of green beans and corn that glowed like jewels in the darkness. And scattered on the floor like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale were toys. A wooden doll with a painted face and yarn hair, a set of jacks made from old metal, a jump rope with handles carved from mountain laurel. And mixed in with the old toys were newer things. A plastic action figure, a small electronic game with a dead screen, a child's winter coat that looked like it had been bought yesterday. "We have so many games to play," the voice called again, and this time I could tell it was coming from deeper in the cellar, from a passage that seemed to stretch back into the mountain itself. Hide and seek and ring around the Rosie and London Bridge. I followed the voice, my flashlight beam dancing ahead of me. The passage opened into a larger room, and then another, like a whole underground house had been carved from the living rock. And in that last room, I finally saw them. 5 children, ages maybe 6 to 12, sitting in a circle on the stone floor. They were playing some kind of hand-clapping game, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm I almost remembered from my own childhood. But something was wrong with the picture. The children looked faded, like old photographs left too long in sunlight. And they were dressed in clothes from different times. One boy in overalls and a straw hat that belonged to the 1930s, a girl in a 1950s dress with puffed sleeves, another child in bell-bottom jeans from the 1970s. They looked up at me with eyes that seemed too large for their faces, too dark for the warm light that filled the room from no source I could see. "Are you here to play with us?" the oldest girl asked. She had dark hair in braids and wore a blue dress that might have been fashionable 50 years. We don't get many visitors. I knelt down to their level, the way I'd learned to do when I worked with kids. "What are your names? How long have you been down here?" The children looked at each other and giggled. "I'm Mary," the girl in the blue dress said. "This is Tommy, and Billy, and Susan, and little James. We live here now. Granny says it's safe here. Warm and safe, and we never have to worry about the cold again." "Who's Granny?" I asked. "She takes care of us," a boy named Tommy said. He was wearing those old-fashioned overalls and had dirt smudged on his cheek like he'd been playing outside. "She found us when we were lost and scared, and she brought us here, where it's always warm." I looked around the room again, noting details my mind had missed the first time. There were beds carved into the stone walls, each one fitted with quilts that looked handmade, a table and chairs sized for children, shelves full of toys and books and games, and hanging on the walls, like some kind of shrine, were photographs. Dozens of them, showing children of all ages. Some of the photos were old, sepia-toned portraits from the early 1900s. Others were more recent, school photos and family snapshots that could have been taken yesterday. "These are all your friends?" I asked, pointing to the pictures. "Some of them," Mary said. "The others had to go away, but we stayed. We like it here." I was starting to understand what I was looking at, and the understanding made my hands shake. These weren't lost children waiting to be rescued. These were children who had been missing for years, maybe decades. And somehow, impossibly, they had stopped aging. "Mary," I said as gently as I could, "do you remember where you came from? Before you lived here?" Her smile faltered for just a moment. I think I was walking in the woods. It was so cold, and I got turned around. I was crying, because I couldn't find my way home. And then Granny found me." "When was this, Mary?" "Oh, a long time ago. Last winter, maybe? Or the winter before?" She looked confused, like she was trying to remember something that kept slipping away. "Time works different here. Granny says we don't need to worry about time anymore. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and measured, coming down the passage from the root cellar above. The children's faces lit up with happiness. "Granny's coming," little James said, clapping his hands. "She'll want to meet you." I turned toward the sound of approaching footsteps, my hand moving instinctively to the radio on my belt. But I already knew it wouldn't work down here, buried under tons of rock and earth. The footsteps stopped just outside the circle of light from my flashlight. I could see the shape of a woman in the shadows, tall and thin, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned mountain dress. "Welcome, Ranger Garrett," a voice said from the darkness. It was the voice of an elderly woman, but there was something cold about it, something that made the warm air in the room feel suddenly thick and hard to breathe. "I've been expecting you." "Ma'am," I said, standing up slowly and keeping my voice steady. "I'm here to check on reports of missing children. I need to get these kids back to safety." The woman in the shadows laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. "Oh, my dear boy," she said, "they are safe. Safer than they've ever been. And soon, you'll be safe too." That's when the walls of the root cellar began to close in around us. The woman stepped into the light, and I got my first good look at what the children called Granny. She was tall and gaunt, with long gray hair braided down her back and skin like old leather. Her dress was black wool, the kind mountain women wore to church 100 years ago. But it was her eyes that made my breath catch. They were completely white, like looking into two pools of milk. "You can call me Granny Garrett," she said, and her smile showed teeth that were too long and too sharp. "Though we're not blood kin, you and I, just happen to settle in the same place, with the same name. Funny how things work out." The children seemed oblivious to how wrong she looked. They clustered around her like she was their real grandmother, hugging her legs and chattering excitedly about their new visitor. "This is Mike," Mary said. "He's a ranger, just like his name says." "He wants to play games with us," Tommy added. Granny's blind eyes fixed on me with impossible accuracy. "Is that so? How wonderful. It's been quite some time since we've had an adult join our family." I backed toward the passage that led to the surface, but something was wrong with it. The tunnel that had brought me here was gone, replaced by solid stone wall. I ran my hands over the rock, searching for any crack or opening, but found nothing. "Don't fret, child," Granny said. "There's nowhere you need to be but here. The storm outside is terrible, winds that could freeze a man solid, snow deep enough to swallow houses whole. Much better to stay here where it's warm and safe." "The storm will pass," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "People will come looking for me." "Oh, people have looked before," Granny said, settling into a rocking chair that I swear hadn't been there a moment before. "Rangers and police and worried parents, all tramping around these mountains calling names and shining flashlights into shadows. They never find what they're looking for." She began to rock, and the chair creaked in a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. "Tell me about your little girl," she said suddenly. I went cold. "How do you know about Sarah?" "I know about all the lost children, dear. The ones taken from their parents by courts and lawyers and people who think they know what's best. The ones who cry themselves to sleep because I can't tuck them in anymore." I could feel tears stinging my eyes, and I hated myself for it. "Sarah's not lost. She's with her mother." "Is she?" Granny's voice was soft now, almost hypnotic. "Then why do you dream about her every night? Why do you wake up calling her name? Why do you keep her picture in your wallet and pretend she's with you when you walk these trails?" The children had gone quiet, watching this exchange with those too large, too dark eyes. "She misses you terribly," Granny continued. "Cries for her daddy every night. Her mother doesn't understand. Tries to distract her with new toys and new friends, but nothing fills that empty place where her father should be." "Stop," I whispered. "I could bring her here," Granny said, "to this warm, safe place where families never have to be separated again, where children never grow up and go away, never stop needing their parents, never forget how much they love them." The air in the room was getting thicker, harder to breathe. I felt dizzy, like I was breathing soup instead of oxygen. "All you have to do is stay," she said. "Join our family. Help me take care of these precious children. And in return, I'll bring Sarah here, and you can be her father forever and always." For just a moment, I almost said yes. The longing in my chest was so strong it felt like a physical pain. To see Sarah again, to hold her, and read her bedtime stories and hear her laugh. But then I looked at the children sitting around us, really looked at them, and I saw something I'd missed before. They were all too still, too perfect, like dolls arranged in a playroom, and their shadows on the wall behind them were wrong, too long, too dark, moving independently of their bodies. "What happened to their parents?" I asked. Granny's rocking chair stopped moving. "Parents grow old," she said. "They change and forget and move away. But I never change. I never forget. I never leave." "That's not what I asked." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. Frost began forming on the stone walls, and the children's breath came out in little puffs of vapor. "Some people," Granny said, her voice like winter wind through dead trees, "ask too many questions." That's when I heard the screaming. It was coming from above us, from somewhere in the ruined settlement. A man's voice, raw with terror, calling for help. Then a woman's voice, high and desperate. "Charlie," I breathed. The cross-country skiers had come back. "Fresh playmates," one of the children said, and it was Billy, the boy in bell-bottom jeans. But his voice sounded different now. Older, colder, hungry. "It's been so long since we had anyone new to play with." The screaming cut off abruptly. Granny smiled. "The children do so love their games. Hide and seek is a particular favorite, though the hiding places can be quite permanent." I ran to where the passage had been, clawing at the stone with my fingernails until they bled. But the rock was solid, real, unmovable. "Let me out," I demanded. "Let them go." "Oh, my dear boy," Granny said, standing up from her chair with a sound like old bones grinding together. "You still don't understand. No one leaves. Ever. That's what makes this place so special. It's where lost children come to stay lost forever." The photographs on the walls began to change. In some, the children's faces were rotting. In others, they were screaming silently, their mouths open in eternal terror. A few showed adults, men and women in ranger uniforms and police badges and hiking gear, all with the same expression of hopeless despair. "The adults never adapt as well," Granny said sadly. "They fight the change, struggle against the peace I offer them. But eventually they learn. Eventually, they all become part of the family." I pulled out my service pistol, a .357 that should have been able to stop a charging bear. I pointed it at Granny's chest. "Back away from the kids," I said. She lowered, a sound like ice cracking. "Bullets, dear child? In a place where death has no meaning?" She gestured to the children, who were all standing now, arranged in a perfect circle around me. "Tell him, children. Tell Ranger Garrett what bullets do to our family." Mary, the little girl in the blue dress, pulled up her shirt to show me her chest. There was a hole there, right over her heart, black-edged and weeping something that wasn't quite blood. "Daddy shot me," she said matter-of-factly. "When I came home different. When I tried to bring my little brother to play with us. But it didn't hurt for long." Tommy rolled up his sleeve to show me his arm, which was bent at an impossible angle, the bone poking through the skin. "Car accident," he explained. "But Granny fixed me up good as new." One by one they showed me their wounds, broken necks, caved-in skulls, marks that looked like animal bites. All of them fatal injuries, but here they were, walking and talking and playing their eternal games. "You see," Granny said, "death is just another kind of game to us, and we always win." The pistol felt heavy and useless in my hand. I let it fall to the floor. "That's better," Granny said. "Now let's discuss the terms of your stay. You can fight this, make it difficult for everyone, Spend years in pain and confusion while you slowly forget who you used to be. Or you can accept your new family with grace and joy. And if I choose option 3? I asked. She tilted her head like a curious bird. Option 3? I burn this place to the ground. I pulled out my flare gun, the one piece of emergency equipment I'd almost forgotten I was carrying. The flare was designed to burn at 2,000 degrees for 30 minutes, hot enough to be seen from 20 miles away, and more than hot enough to turn a root cellar into a furnace. Granny's white eyes went wide. You wouldn't dare. The Kadesha. Ildren? The children are already dead, I said. Have been for years, decades maybe. Whatever you are, whatever this place is, it ends now. I pointed the flare gun at the wooden shelves, lined with preserved food and old quilts and children's toys. All I want is Sarah, I said. Just bring me Sarah and we'll stay. We'll be your family forever. For a moment I thought she believed me. For a moment I almost believed it myself. Then she smiled and I saw the truth written in those milk-white eyes. Oh, my dear sweet boy, she said. Sarah is already here. The air in the root cellar shimmered like heat waves, and suddenly there was a sixth child in the circle. Sarah. My Sarah, exactly as I remembered her. 8 years old, gap-toothed smile, pigtails that never stayed straight. She was wearing the pink winter coat I'd bought her last Christmas, before the custody hearing, before everything fell apart. Daddy! She cried, and ran toward me with her arms outstretched. Every instinct I had screamed at me to drop the flare gun, to scoop her up and hold her tight and never let her go again. But I forced myself to stay still, to keep the weapon pointed at the shelves of preserved food. You're not real, I said, though the words felt like swallowing broken glass. Sarah stopped running, her face crumpling with hurt and confusion. Daddy? It's me. It's really me. Granny brought me here just like she promised. Sarah lives in California with her mother, I said. She's safe and happy, and she doesn't even know I'm missing yet. But even as I said it, doubt crept into my voice. How long had I been down here? Hours? Days? Time seemed to work differently in this place, like Granny said. Maybe Sarah had been reported missing. Maybe her mother had called the police and they'd somehow traced her disappearance to Mount Rogers. Don't listen to him, dear, Granny said, moving to stand behind Sarah and placing her hands on my daughter's shoulders. Adults sometimes forget things when they're scared, but you remember, don't you? You remember crying for your daddy every night? You remember wishing you could see him again? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I missed you so much, Daddy. Mommy said you didn't want to see me anymore, but I knew that wasn't true. I knew if I wished hard enough, you'd come find me. My hand started to shake. The flare gun felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I wanted to see you too, sweetheart, I whispered. Every single day. Then put the gun down, Sarah said. Put it down and give me a hug. We can stay here together, just like we used to talk about, remember? You used to say we'd go camping in the mountains and have adventures? I remembered. Long summer afternoons when Sarah was 5 and 6 before the divorce, when we'd spread a blanket in the backyard and pretend we were explorers discovering new lands. I'd tell her stories about brave rangers and clever children who solved mysteries together. This can be our adventure, Daddy, Sarah said. Our forever adventure. I started to lower the flare gun. Then I saw her shadow. Just like the other children, Sarah's shadow on the wall was wrong. Too long, too dark, and it moved when she stood still. But there was something else, something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Her shadow had no face. Where Sarah's head should have cast a shadow, there was just empty darkness. A void shaped like a little girl, hungry and patient and utterly alien. You're not Sarah, I said. The thing wearing my daughter's face stopped crying. Its expression went blank, emotionless. Of course I'm Sarah, it said. But the voice was different now, older, colder. I'm your little girl, and I love you, and I want to stay here with you forever and ever. Sarah is afraid of the dark, I said. She's been afraid since she was 3 years old. She sleeps with a nightlight shaped like a butterfly. The Sarah thing tilted its head. Children grow out of fears. Not that one. And Sarah has a scar on her knee from when she fell off her bike last summer. Show me the scar. The thing looked down at its legs, confused. When it looked back, up, Sarah's face was melting away like candle wax, revealing something underneath that hurt to look at directly. You're very clever, Granny said. But cleverness won't help you now. The root cellar around us began to change. The walls stretched higher and higher until they disappeared into darkness above our heads. The floor dropped away in places, revealing deep pits that echoed with the sounds of crying children. And the other kids, Mary and Tommy and Billy and Susan and little James, began to change too. Their clothes rotted away, showing the wounds that had killed them decades ago. Their faces became gaunt and hollow, eyes like black holes that sucked in light and hope and warmth. This is what we really are, Mary said, her voice like wind through a graveyard. This is what you'll become. The living world forgot about us, Tommy added, his broken arm hanging useless at his side. But Granny remembered. Granny keeps us safe in the dark. I raised the flare gun again, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely aim. 30 seconds, I said. 30 seconds of fire, and this whole place burns down around us. And then what? Granny asked. You die in the flames, just another missing ranger whose body is never found. And the children stay exactly as they are, waiting in the ashes for the next lost soul to stumble into our web. She was right, and we both knew it. Even if I burned down this part of the root cellar, these things would survive. They'd been surviving for decades, maybe centuries. All I'd accomplish would be my own death. But there might be another way. You collect lost children, I said. Children who are scared and alone and don't know where else to go. That's right, Granny said proudly. I give them a home, a family, safety. But what about found children? What about children who aren't lost anymore? Her white eyes narrowed. What did you mean? I thought about Sarah, really thought about her for the first time in months. Not the idealized memory I carried in my wallet, but the real little girl living in California. Was she really crying for me every night? Was she really miserable without me? Or was that just what I wanted to believe? Sarah isn't lost, I said. She has a home. She has friends at school and toys she loves, and a mother who takes care of her. She misses me sometimes, but she's not lost. She needs her father, Granny snarled. She has a father, me. But she doesn't need me hovering over her every second trying to keep her from growing up. She needs me to be strong enough to let her have her own life. The Sarah thing began to waver, becoming translucent. You're lying, it said, but the voice was uncertain now. No, I said. I've been lying to myself for 3 years, pretending that Sarah was miserable without me because it made me feel important. But the truth is, she's doing fine. Better than fine. She's happy. The fake Sarah let out a wail of despair and dissolved like smoke. Enough! Granny roared, and her voice shook the walls of the root cellar. You will stay. You will be part of this family. You will... I will not, I said, and fired the flare directly at her chest. The flare hit her with a sound like thunder, and she burst into flames that burned white and clean and impossibly bright. The children screamed and scattered, but the fire spread faster than they could run. Within seconds, the entire root cellar was ablaze. But something strange happened as Granny burned. Instead of falling to the ground in agony, she began to change. The fire seemed to burn away everything false and twisted about her, revealing what she really was underneath. A woman. Just a woman. Old and tired and heartbroken, but human. My children, she whispered as the flames consumed her. My pute, but lost children. I only wanted to keep them safe. I know, I said. But safe isn't the same as free. She looked at me with eyes that were suddenly, startlingly blue. Normal eyes, human eyes filled with tears. I lost my own babies to the mountain winters, she said, All 6 of them, over the years. Fever and cold and accidents and heartbreak. I couldn't bear to lose anyone else. The children had stopped screaming. They stood in a circle around us, watching their granny burn with expressions of wonder and relief. But we were never really here, were we? Mary asked. Not really alive? Granny shook her head. I kept you from moving on, trapped you in your pain because I couldn't bear to be alone with mine. It's okay, Tommy said, taking her burning hand in his own. We understand. One by one, the children began to glow with the same white light that consumed Granny. Not the sickly light of decay, but something pure and warm and peaceful. Thank you, Mary said to me as she faded away. Thank you for helping us remember. They vanished into the light, all of them together, leaving me alone in a root cellar that was suddenly just a root cellar again. Stone walls lined with empty shelves, cold air thick with the smell of old earth and forgotten years. I climbed the steps to the surface, pushed open the cellar door, and stepped out into clean, cold mountain air. The storm had passed. I stood in the ruins of the Garrett settlement under a sky full of stars. The snow had stopped falling and the wind had died to a whisper. Everything was peaceful and still, the way mountains are supposed to be. I found Charlie and his wife about 50 yards from the root cellar, unconscious but alive, half buried in a snowdrift. They had no memory of what had happened to them, just vague recollections of getting lost in the storm and taking shelter in an old cabin. I helped them back to the ranger station, where Bill and Janet were setting up search parties to look for all of us. The official report said that the Michaels had suffered from hypothermia and mild hallucinations brought on by exposure. As for the children they'd heard playing in the snow, well, storms can make all kinds of strange sounds when the wind gets up in the trees just right. I never told anyone what really happened in that root cellar. Who would believe it? And what would be the point? The children were at peace now, finally free to go wherever children go when their earthly games are done. But I kept thinking about what Granny had said, about lost children and the people who love them too much to let them go. 3 weeks after the storm, I called Sarah's mother in California. Mike? Lisa sounded surprised to hear from me. Is everything okay? It's not your scheduled call day. I know, I said. I wanted to ask how Sarah's doing. Really doing. Not just the stuff you put in your letters. There was a long pause. Then Lisa said, She's doing well, Mike. Really well. She joined the soccer team at school and she's made some good friends. She still misses you, but she's not crying herself to sleep every night? No, Lisa said softly. She's not. She's growing up, Mike. Becoming her own person. I felt something tight in my chest finally loosen. That's good. That's what's supposed to happen. You could visit more, Lisa offered. I know the custody agreement says 2 weeks in summer, but if you wanted to come out for a weekend sometime, or if Sarah wanted to visit you. Maybe, I said. When she's ready, when she wants to, not because I need her to. After I hung up, I took Sarah's picture out of my wallet and really looked at it. Not the way I had been looking at it for 3 years, like a relic of something lost forever, but the way you look at a snapshot of someone you love who's living their own life somewhere else. She looked happy in the picture. Really happy. I put the photo back in my wallet, but I didn't take it out again for a long time. I stayed on at Mount Rogers for another 15 years. I became something of an expert in missing children cases. And I'm proud to say I found most of the kids I went looking for. I learned the difference between children who are truly lost and children who are just temporarily misplaced. More importantly, I learned when to hold on and when to let go. I never saw the ghost children again, but sometimes, on quiet winter nights when the snow is falling thick and the wind is singing through the trees, I think I can hear them playing somewhere far away. Happy sounds, free sounds, the way children are supposed to sound. And sometimes when I'm walking the mountain trails, I pretend Sarah is with me, asking questions about everything we see. But now it's a different kind of pretending. Now I imagine her as she really is. Older, stronger, more independent than the little girl in the photograph. I imagine the conversations we might have someday, when she's ready to choose our relationship for herself instead of having it chosen for her by courts and custody agreements and the desperate need of a father who loved her too much to let her grow up. The root cellar at the old Garrett settlement collapsed completely the spring after the storm. By summer, new growth had covered the site so completely that you'd never know there had been anything there at all. Nature has a way of healing old wounds, given enough time. But if you know where to look, if you dig down through the earth and leaves and years of accumulated silence, you can still find the stone foundation. Still see the marks where families lived and loved and lost each other to the hard truths of mountain life. And if you listen carefully on winter nights when the snow is deep and the wind is just right, you might hear the sound of children playing. But don't go looking for them. Don't try to join their games. Some families are meant to stay together forever. Others are meant to let each other go. The trick is knowing which kind you belong to. My name is Mike Garrett, and I used to think that loving someone meant never letting them leave. Now I know better. Love isn't about holding on so tight that nothing can escape. Sometimes love means opening your hands and trusting that what belongs with you will find its way back. And sometimes it means having the courage to stay lost yourself so that others can be found. My name is William Crenshaw, but everyone calls me Bill. I've been a park ranger at George Washington National Forest for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, even a few marijuana farms hidden back in the deep woods. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at Cataract Falls in September of 1959. I should tell you up front that I'm deaf in my left ear. Shrapnel from Korea did that to me back in '53. Most folks think that makes me less good at my job, but the truth is, it makes me better. When you can't rely on hearing everything, you learn to see things others miss, the way shadows fall wrong, how animals act when something's not right, the little details that most people walk right past. Cataract Falls sits about 3 miles back from the main road, accessible only by a narrow hiking trail that winds through some of the thickest forest in Virginia. The waterfall itself is 93 feet of pure white water crashing down over black granite rocks. Been there since the Ice Age, the geologists say. The Cherokee used to call it a thin place, somewhere the world of the living touched the world of the dead. The falls create their own weather. All that water hitting rock throws up a mist cloud that never quite goes away. In September, when the humidity's still high but the nights are getting cool, that mist can get thick as soup. Sometimes you can't see 10 feet in front of your face down there. That's where I was headed on September 15th when the call came in. A group of college kids from Virginia Tech, geology students studying rock formations, had missed their check-in time. Their professor, Dr. Martinez, was worried sick, said they were supposed to be back by Sunday evening, and it was now Tuesday morning with no word. They're good kids, Dr. Martinez told me, over the crackling radio. Responsible? Sarah Chen's the group leader. She's never missed a deadline in her life. Something's wrong, Ranger Crenshaw. I loaded up my pack with the usual search gear: rope, first aid kit, emergency flares, and enough food for 3 days. My old Army compass, the one that had gotten me through Korea when the newer equipment failed. Waterproof matches in a metal case. A signal mirror that could flash messages 5 miles on a clear day. The weather had been strange all month. High-pressure system sitting over the valley like a lid on a pot, trapping all the humidity and fog. Normally, morning sun burns off the mist by 10 o'clock. But for 3 weeks now, Cataract Falls had been shrouded in fog from sunset to noon. Some mornings, the mist was so thick, it looked solid, like you could walk on it. The trail down to the falls was quiet. Too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, no rustling in the underbrush. Just the sound of my boots on packed earth and the distant roar of falling water. Even the insects seemed to be holding their breath. About halfway down, I found the first sign of trouble. Boot prints in the mud, but they were all jumbled up, like the students had been running or stumbling around in the dark. Some of the prints went off the trail into the thick woods, which made no sense. These kids knew better than to wander off the marked path. The temperature started dropping as I got closer to the falls. Not unusual. All that mist acts like natural air conditioning. But there were pockets of cold air that hit you like walking into a freezer. Perfect human-shaped pockets, as if invisible people were standing in the fog, breathing out winter. When I finally reached the falls, the first thing I noticed was their equipment scattered everywhere. Backpacks, notebooks, rock samples, all spread around the base of the waterfall, like someone had thrown them from the top. But no students, no bodies, no blood, just fog. Thick, white fog that moved against the wind. That's when I saw the first shape walking on the water. At first, I told myself it was just pareidolia, the way your brain turns random patterns into familiar shapes, like seeing faces in clouds or animals in rock formations. The human mind wants to make sense of things, especially when you're alone in a place like Cataract Falls with missing students and equipment scattered like a tornado hit. But this shape had purpose. It moved with the steady, measured pace of someone walking patrol. Back and forth across the pool at the base of the falls, never breaking stride, never looking around, just walking on water like it was solid ground. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the mist was playing tricks on me. When I looked again, there were 3 shapes, all walking in formation, about 6 feet apart, rifles held at the ready position across their chests. Rifles that looked suspiciously like Civil War muskets. I'd seen enough old photographs to recognize the silhouette. Long barrels, wooden stocks, the kind of weapons soldiers carried at Antietam and Gettysburg. But these were made of fog, solid enough to catch the light but transparent as morning mist. My compass started spinning, just spinning in lazy circles like it couldn't find north. The metal case of my waterproof matches felt warm against my leg, and when I pulled it out, the metal was magnetized. Paper clips from my shirt pockets stuck to it like tiny iron filings. The fog soldiers, because that's what they were, I could see that now, paid me no attention. They just kept walking their patrol route back and forth across water that should have swallowed them instantly. Their boots made no splash, no sound, but I could see the fog swirl around their legs with each step. I started calling for the students. "Sarah? Marcus? Anyone out there?" My voice echoed off the rock walls, but the echoes came back wrong, delayed, like the sound was traveling through thick mud instead of air, and underneath my choose. I heard something else. Marching. The steady rhythm of boots on stone, keeping time like a military drill. That's when I remembered what old Charlie Crowfeather had told me about this place. Charlie was Cherokee, one of the few left who still knew the old stories. He'd warned me about Cataract Falls, said it was a crossing place where the living world touched the spirit world. During the war between the states, Charlie had said, a whole Union regiment got lost back there. Never found so much as a button or a bone. The Cherokee knew to stay away during the fog season, said you could hear them still fighting their war, trying to find their way home. I'd laughed it off at the time. Old stories, I'd thought. Superstition. Now, watching fog soldiers march through mist that defied every law of physics I knew, I wasn't laughing anymore. I pulled out my binoculars and tried to get a closer look. The fog warriors were clearer through the lenses, not just shapes anymore, but actual people. Young men in blue uniforms with brass buttons and leather belts. Their faces were serious, focused, like soldiers on guard duty in enemy territory. But their eyes were wrong. Empty white spaces where eyes should be, like someone had cut holes in a photograph. I was so focused on the patrol that I almost missed the hand waving from inside a wall of fog about 50 yards to my right. A human hand, flesh and blood, moving weakly back and forth like someone trying to signal for help. I grabbed my rope and headed toward it, but the fog seemed to push back against me. Every step forward felt like walking through thick honey. The air itself resisted my movement, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The hand belonged to Marcus Webb, one of the geology students. He was suspended about 3 feet off the ground in a pocket of fog so dense it looked solid. Unconscious, but breathing. Held up by nothing I could see or understand. When I reached out to grab him, my hand passed through fog that felt like ice-cold cotton. But Marcus was real, solid, warm. I pulled him down and shook him awake. "Marcus, can you hear me? What happened to the others?" He opened his eyes and looked right through me, like I wasn't there. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "Reporting for duty, sir. Private Webb, 15th Massachusetts Infantry, ready to march." "Marcus, it's me, Ranger Crenshaw. You're not in the Army. You're a college student. Where are Sarah and the others?" But he just kept staring past me with those empty eyes, mumbling about drill formations and enemy positions. Whatever had happened to him, it had scrambled his brain good. Or maybe something had gotten into his brain. That's when I heard the bugle call echoing through the mist, clear as day, played on a brass horn by someone who knew what they were doing. It was assembly. The call that brings soldiers together for formation. And from somewhere in the fog, other voices answered. Young voices, familiar voices, calling back in perfect military cadence. "Yes, sir. Moving to assembly point, sir." One of those voices belonged to Sarah Chen. I tied Marcus to a sturdy oak tree with climbing rope, partly to keep him safe and partly to keep him from wandering off to join whatever was calling to him through the fog. He didn't fight me, just stood there at attention like a soldier waiting for orders. The bugle call came again, and this time I could see where it was coming from. On a ledge about 30 feet up the rock face, a figure in a Union officer's uniform was raising a brass horn to his lips. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, pure and clear and completely impossible, because the officer was made of fog, solid enough to hold a bugle, transparent enough to see the rock wall behind him. More shapes were gathering at the base of the falls now, dozens of them forming neat rows like soldiers lining up for inspection. Some wore blue Union uniforms, others gray Confederate. They stood facing each other across the pool, rifles ready, like they were frozen at the moment just before a battle, and mixed in among them were the students. Sarah Chen stood in the front rank of the Union formation, her geology field clothes replaced by a blue wool uniform that flickered between solid and mist. Next to her was Tom Rodriguez, holding a rifle that looked real as steel but wavered like heat shimmer. I'd seen enough. These kids were in serious danger, even if I didn't understand exactly what kind. I started down toward the formations, but the fog pushed back harder now, like walking into a strong wind. My progress slowed to a crawl. That's when I noticed the fog soldiers looking at me, really looking, not just staring through me like I was invisible. Their empty white eyes tracked my movement, and several of them broke formation to drift in my direction. A Confederate captain with a magnificent beard stepped forward from his line. When he spoke, his voice echoed like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "You there, civilian. This is a military engagement zone. State your business or be considered a combatant." I stopped dead. This ghost soldier was talking to me like I was a real person, not just another piece of mist to ignore. My war experience kicked in automatically. "Ranger William Crenshaw, United States Army, Korea," I said, snapping to attention. "I'm here to evacuate civilians caught in your area of operations." The captain nodded approvingly. "A fellow soldier. We can use experienced men. The Yankees have been reinforced with fresh recruits." He gestured toward the students mixed in with his fog warriors. "Join our ranks, Sergeant Crenshaw. Help us win this battle once and for all." On the Union side, an officer with lieutenant's bars stepped forward. "Belay that order, soldier. Report to Union lines immediately. We're short on experienced men. And these rebel ghosts have been using live recruits as cannon fodder." Both sides wanted me to join their fight. Both sides were using living people, my missing students, as replacement. Soldiers in some kind of eternal battle. And both sides seemed to think this was perfectly normal. I tried to stay calm and think through the situation. These weren't random ghosts haunting a waterfall. They were soldiers, still fighting the Civil War nearly 100 years after it ended, trapped in fog and time, reliving the same battle over and over, recruiting the living to replace their fallen comrades. The Cherokee elder had been right. This was a thin place where the world of the dead touched the world of the living. And somehow, the missing students had crossed over. "I need to speak with your commanding officers," I said, addressing both sides. Both of you. There are protocols for handling civilian evacuations in combat zones. The Confederate captain and Union lieutenant exchanged glances across the battle line. For a moment they looked less like eternal enemies and more like professional soldiers dealing with an unusual situation. "Very well," said the Confederate. "Colonel Beauregard will hear you, but make it quick. The battle begins at sunset, as it has every evening for longer than I care to remember." The Union officer nodded. "Major Patterson agrees to a brief truce for civilian matters, but don't expect mercy when the fighting starts, Johnny Reb." As they led me toward their respective command posts, I caught glimpses of the other missing students scattered throughout both formations. All of them had that same empty stare as Marcus, like someone else was driving their bodies while their souls were locked away somewhere safe. The fog grew thicker as we moved deeper into the ghostly encampment. Tents made of mist, campfires that gave off cold light instead of heat, soldiers cleaning weapons that existed somewhere between real and imaginary, and everywhere the sound of preparation for battle, the click of rifle bolts, the whisper of steel bayas, sharpened the quiet conversations of men getting ready to die again. Just like Korea, I thought. Same sounds, same tension, same smell of fear and determination mixed together. Except these soldiers had been getting ready for the same battle for nearly a century. As we reached the command area, both colonels emerged from their fog tents. They looked exactly like Civil War officers should. Perfectly pressed uniforms, confident bearing, eyes full of the weight of command. But when they spoke, I heard something else in their voices. Something I recognized from my own nightmares about Korea. They were tired, soul-deep, bone-weary, tired. Tired of fighting, tired of dying, tired of watching good men fall for causes they could barely remember. Maybe, just maybe, that was something I could work with. "Gentlemen," I said, addressing both colonels, "I'm here about a prisoner exchange." Both officers looked puzzled. Colonel Beauregard, the Confederate commander, stroked his beard thoughtfully. "What prisoners?" "We follow the accepted rules of warfare, sir. Any captured enemy soldiers are treated according to military protocol." Major Patterson, the Union commander, nodded agreement. "Indeed. Though I would hardly call voluntary enlistment a matter for prisoner exchange." "Those aren't soldiers," I said, pointing toward Sarah and the other students mixed in with their ghostly formations. "They're civilians, college students, kids who were studying rocks when they wandered into your operational area." The colonels exchanged glances. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in their faces. "Impossible," said Beauregard. "They presented themselves for military service, answered the call to arms with proper discipline. Young Chen there has shown remarkable aptitude for infantry tactics. And Rodriguez has proven himself steady under fire," added Patterson. "They volunteered range. Same as any patriotic citizen answering their country's call." I realized these ghost officers genuinely believed the students had enlisted willingly. In their fog-trapped minds, this eternal battle was still the most important thing in the world, and anyone who wandered into their domain must be there to help fight it. "The war's over," I said gently. "Has been since 1865. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. The Union won. The slaves were freed. It's 1959 now, almost 100 years later." The reaction was immediate and violent. Both formations of fog soldiers turned toward me, rifles raised, eyes blazing with sudden fury. The mist around us began to swirl faster, forming miniature tornadoes that tugged at my clothes and equipment. "Lies!" shouted Beauregard. "Yankee propaganda designed to break our morale." "Union disinformation," Patterson yelled back. "An attempt to make us surrender what we've fought so hard to defend." The temperature dropped another 20 degrees, and the fog became so thick I could barely see my own hands. All around me, I heard the mechanical sounds of dozens of rifles being cocked and aimed. I was about to be shot by ghosts for telling the truth. But then my hearing damage saved my life. Because I couldn't hear everything, I'd learned to focus on what I could hear. And what I heard Underneath all the shouting and weapon preparation was something else entirely. Crying. Quiet, desperate crying from someone trying hard not to be heard. Sarah Chen, standing in the Union formation with her fog rifle, was weeping. Real tears running down her face, even while her body stood at attention like a perfect soldier. The students weren't willing recruits. They were prisoners in their own bodies, watching helplessly while something else controlled their movements. And that something else, the ghostly essence of dead soldiers, was just as trapped as they were. "Wait," I called out, raising my hands. "Before you shoot me, answer one question. How long have you been fighting this battle?" The colonels hesitated. Patterson spoke first, uncertainty creeping into his voice. We've been holding this position since September 15th, 1863, finished Beauregard. The day we were ordered to secure this strategic crossing point. "And how many times have you won this battle?" I asked. Silence. Complete, dead silence from both sides. Because the truth was, neither side had ever won. They'd been fighting the same engagement every night for 96 years, dying and reforming and dying again, trapped in an endless loop of violence that served no purpose except to feed their own hatred. "Gentlemen," I said, "I think it's time we discussed terms for a permanent ceasefire." The fog began to thin slightly, and I could see both colonels more clearly. They looked older now, more tired, like the weight of a century's worth of fighting was finally catching up to them. "What do you propose?" asked Patterson. Before I could answer, a new voice cut through the mist, old, creaky, but carrying absolute authority. "I propose you boys listen to what this ranger has to say." Charlie Crow Feather stepped out of the fog, looking exactly like he had every time I'd seen him at the ranger station. Flannel shirt, worn jeans, weathered face full of wisdom and patience. Except here, in this place between worlds, he seemed to glow with soft silver light. "Charlie," I breathed, "how did you get here?" The old Cherokee smiled. "Same way you did, Bill. I walked. This is my place to guard. Just like the falls are your place to protect. Been keeping watch over these lost soldiers for near 100 years now, waiting for someone who could help them find their way home." He turned to address both colonels, and when he spoke, there was something in his voice that made every soldier in both formations lower their weapons. "The war you're fighting ended long ago. The country you're trying to save became something better than either of you imagined. And the enemy you're trying to defeat is standing right beside you, just as tired and lost as you are." The fog continued to thin, and for the first time, I could see the entire battlefield clearly. Union and Confederate soldiers stood facing each other across the pool, weapons ready, faces grim with determination. But they were mirror images of each other. Same tired eyes, same desperate hope that this time would be different, same deep longing for home and peace and rest. "You want to know how to win this battle?" Charlie continued. "Put down your weapons, shake hands with your enemy, forgive each other for all the pain you've caused. That's the only victory that matters now." Both colonels looked at each other across the battle line. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, Patterson unbuckled his sword belt and let it fall to the ground. Beauregard did the same. All around the pool, fog soldiers began lowering their rifles. And as they did, the students mixed in among them began to blink and look around, confusion replacing the empty stare of possession. Sarah Chen stumbled out of the Union formation, shaking her head like she was waking from a deep sleep. "Ranger Crenshaw? Where are we? What happened to our equipment?" But the reconciliation wasn't complete yet. Some of the soldiers on both sides were still gripping their weapons, still glaring at their enemies with century-old hatred. That's when I understood what I had to do. I walked to the edge of the pool, right between the two formations, and started talking. Not to the colonels or the officers, but to the regular soldiers. The young men who died far from home in a war they barely understood. "My name is William Crenshaw," I said, my voice carrying across the water. "I'm a veteran of the Korean War. I know what it's like to fight in a foreign place for reasons that don't always make sense. I know what it's like to lose good friends to enemy bullets. and I know what it's like to carry the weight of that war long after the shooting stops. The fog soldiers from they're listening now, really listening. Some lowered their rifles completely. I also know what it's like to come home and find out the world moved on without you. That people don't want to hear your stories or understand what you've been through. That the cause you fought for doesn't look the same in peacetime as it did on the battlefield. On both sides, soldiers were nodding. The universal experience of warriors returning from war, finding themselves strangers in their own land. But here's what I learned in Korea, and what took me years to understand. The war ends when you decide it ends. Not when the politicians sign papers or the generals shake hands. When you, personally, decide that you've carried the weight long enough. I gestured toward the students who were now huddled together near Marcus, all of them looking confused but alive. These kids aren't your enemies. The men standing across from you aren't your enemies anymore either. Your real enemy is the hatred that's kept you trapped here for 96 years, fighting the same battle over and over because you can't let it go. The mist began to glow with soft golden light, like sunrise breaking through clouds. Charlie Crow Feather moved to stand beside me, his presence somehow making my words carry more weight. The Cherokee have a saying, Charlie added. The longest war is the one you fight with yourself. These boys have been fighting themselves so long they forgot who they really were underneath all that anger. Colonel Beauregard stepped forward, his fog form beginning to solidify into something more human, more real. If the war is truly over, what becomes of us? Where do soldiers go when there are no more battles to fight? Home, I said simply. You go home. Maybe not the home you left. That's long gone. But the home that's been waiting for you all this time, the place where there's no more pain, and no more fear, no more watching your friends die. Major Patterson moved to stand beside his former enemy. And our fallen comrades? The men we've lost? They're already there, Charlie said. They've been waiting for you to join them. All you have to do is lay down your arms and walk away from this place. Around the pool, fog soldiers from both armies began setting down their rifles and muskets. The weapons dissolved into mist as soon as they touched the ground, like they'd never been real in the first place. But some of the soldiers were still hesitant. A century of hatred doesn't die easily. That's when I had an idea. I pulled out my compass, the one that had been spinning wildly since I arrived. Now it was pointing steady north, like the magnetic interference was finally clearing. Formation, I called out, using my old sergeant's voice from Korea. Union and Confederate forces, fall in for joint muster. Both armies moved automatically, military training overriding personal feelings. But instead of forming opposing battle lines, I arranged them in a single formation, Union and Confederate soldiers standing side by side, united for the first time in nearly a century. By the left, quick march, I commanded, direction of movement, Cataract Falls. And they marched, together, blue and gray uniforms mixed in the same ranks, former enemies keeping step like they'd drilled together their whole lives. As they approached the waterfall, their fog forms began to glow brighter, becoming translucent, then transparent. One by one, they walked into the falling water and disappeared. Not destroyed, transformed, released, finally able to continue the journey they'd started so long ago. Colonel Beauregard and Major Patterson were the last to go. They shook hands at the edge of the pool, two professional soldiers showing mutual respect despite everything that had passed between them. Perhaps we'll serve together in the next campaign, said Beauregard. I'd be honored, sir, Patterson replied. Then they too walked into the falls and were gone. The fog began to lift, revealing clear blue sky for the first time in weeks. The students were all accounted for, confused but unharmed. Their equipment was scattered but intact. Apparently, ghost soldiers are careful with other people's property. Charlie Crow Feather was the last to fade away, his silver glow growing dim as the supernatural energy left the area. Thank you, Bill, he said. My people's debt to these lost soldiers is finally paid. The crossing place is clean now, safe for the living. Will I see you again? I asked. He smiled. When your own battles are done and you're ready to come home yourself. But not for a long time yet. You've got too much good work left to do." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with 5 confused college students and a waterfall that looked like any other tourist attraction in Virginia. It took us 2 days to hike back to civilization. The students recovered their memories gradually. Fragments of being lost in fog, hearing music that seemed to call them deeper into the mist. Then nothing until they woke up in military formations they didn't remember joining. Dr. Martinez was relieved to have his students back safe and didn't ask too many questions about the details. The official report listed the incident as temporary disorientation due to unusual weather conditions, which was technically true. I never told anyone the whole story. Who would believe it? But something changed in me after Cataract Falls. The nightmares from Korea started to fade. The guilt I'd carried about friends who didn't make it home began to lift. I started volunteering at the Veterans Administration Hospital, talking to soldiers coming back from whatever war was happening at the time, helping them understand that the battle ends when you decide it ends, not when someone else says it's over. And sometimes, when I'm down at Cataract Falls during my regular patrols, I swim, or I can still hear it. Very faint, almost lost in the sound of falling water. A bugle playing taps, that final call that sends soldiers to their rest. But it's peaceful now. No anger in it. No endless repetition. Just a soldier's lullaby, played once and allowed to fade into silence, the way it was always meant to be. My name is Elizabeth Morrison, but everyone calls me Beth. I've been a park ranger for 9 years now, and I'm the first woman to hold this job in our district. Some folks still look at me funny when I tell them what I do for a living, but I've got a PhD in geology, and I know these mountains better than most people know their own backyard. Grandfather Mountain has always been special to me. At 5,946 feet, it's one of the tallest peaks in North Carolina, made of ancient quartzite that's older than most life on Earth. The Cherokee people called it sacred, and my grandmother, who was Cherokee, used to tell me stories about certain places on the mountain that I should stay away from. "Some stones remember things, Beth," she'd say in her quiet voice. "They hold onto voices that should have moved on long ago." I never believed those old stories. I'm a scientist. When people reported strange sounds or feelings up on the mountain, I always found logical explanations. Wind through rock formations, temperature changes causing stones to crack, echo chambers created by specific geological structures. Every mystery had a scientific answer. That was before October 1964, before the construction crews working on the new mile-high bridge started reporting things that didn't make sense. The bridge project had been going on for months, and everything was normal until the first week of October. The leaves were turning brilliant red and gold, and fog rolled through the valleys every morning like clockwork. The construction crew had been blasting and moving tons of rock to make room for the bridge supports. That's when they started finding the stones. These weren't ordinary quartzite formations. The blasting had uncovered a section of rock that was arranged in perfect geometric patterns, circles within circles, like someone had carefully placed each stone with mathematical precision. The crew, foreman called me out to take a look. "Never seen anything like it, Ranger Morrison," he said, scratching his head under his hard hat. "These rocks, they look almost arranged, like someone built something here a long time ago." I examined the formation with my geological tools. The quartzite was definitely ancient, but the arrangement was impossible. Natural geological processes don't create perfect geometric patterns. Someone or something had deliberately placed these stones, but that made no sense either. The rock layers showed these formations had been buried for centuries, maybe longer. "Must be some kind of Cherokee construction," I told the foreman, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Maybe a ceremonial site that got covered over time. That night, the crew reported the first strange incident. The equipment operator said he'd parked his bulldozer 50 feet from the stone formation when work ended. When he came back the next morning, it was sitting right next to the stones with the engine running, even though he had the only key. "Someone's playing pranks," I assured him, but I made a note in my logbook anyway. As the days went on, More equipment was found, moved overnight. Tools disappeared and reappeared in different locations. The men started talking about strange sounds coming from the stone formation after dark. By the middle of October, I decided to spend the night up there myself with my monitoring equipment. The weather was getting colder, dropping near freezing at night, and the fog was getting thicker. The construction crew had gone home for the weekend, leaving me alone on the mountain 40 miles from the nearest medical help. I set up my camp about 100 yards from the stone formation, close enough to monitor but far enough away to feel safe. I had my geological survey tools, seismic monitoring equipment, a shortwave radio, and enough supplies. Yes, for 3 days. As the sun set behind the mountains, I noticed something that should have been my first real warning. The forest was completely silent. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to avoid this particular spot on the mountain. The only sound was my own breathing and the quiet hum of my electronic equipment. Around midnight, when the temperature dropped below freezing, I heard it for the first time, singing. The sound started so softly I thought it might be wind through the rock formation, but as I listened more carefully, I realized it wasn't random noise. It was organized, harmonized, multiple voices singing together in a language I almost recognized. My grandmother had taught me some Cherokee words when I was little, and these voices seemed to be singing in that ancient language. Death songs, mourning chants, the kind of music my people sang when someone passed on to the spirit world. I grabbed my audio recording equipment and pointed the microphone toward the stone formation. Through my headphones, the singing became clearer. There had to be at least 20 voices, maybe more. Men, women, children, all singing together in perfect harmony. But that was impossible. There was nobody up here except me. I switched on my seismic monitoring equipment to see if the mountain itself was causing the sounds. The needles on my instruments jumped wildly, showing vibrations that didn't match any known geological phenomena. The patterns looked almost like sound waves, as if the mountain was somehow recording and playing back audio. The singing continued for about an hour, then gradually faded as the temperature stabilized. When it stopped, the silence felt even deeper than before. I sat in my tent, staring at the stone formation in the moonlight, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. The next morning, I hiked down to the ranger station and played my recordings for my supervisor. He listened with a puzzled expression, then suggested I might have picked up radio signals bouncing off the mountain's metal deposits. Radio signals don't sing in Cherokee, I told him. Maybe it's some kind of prank, kids with a speaker hidden in the rocks. But I knew better. I'd examined every inch of those stone formations. There was nowhere to hide a speaker system, and the acoustic properties were all wrong for artificial sound reproduction. That weekend, I drove to visit my grandmother in Cherokee County. She was 91 years old and still sharp as a knife. When I described the stone formation and played her my recordings, her face went pale. "You need to stay away from that place, Beth," she said firmly. "Those are the singing stones. My grandmother told me about them when I was your age." "Grandmother, you know I don't believe in awe. Some things don't care what you believe," she interrupted. During the forced march in 1838, when our people were driven from their homes, many died in the mountains near that place. It was winter, and they were sick and starving. The survivors said the stones took in their final words, their death songs, and kept them trapped. She leaned forward in her chair, fixing me with intense dark eyes. "The stones remember voices, Beth. They collect them like a white man collects coins. But they're not satisfied with just the voices of the dead. They want new voices too, living voices. And once they take your voice, you can never get it back." I tried to explain about acoustic phenomena and natural sound chambers, but she just shook her head. "Your science books don't know everything, granddaughter. Promise me you'll stay away from those stones." I couldn't promise that. It was my job to investigate, and I was getting close to understanding what was really happening up there. On Monday morning, I hiked back up to the construction site with more sophisticated recording equipment. The crew had returned for the week, but something was wrong. Jake Martinelli, one of the equipment operators, was sitting by himself near the work trailer, staring at the stone formation with a blank expression. When his supervisor tried to talk to him, Jake opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "He was fine on Friday," the foreman told me. Came to work Monday morning and couldn't say a word. Keeps pointing at those rocks and making gestures, but we can't understand what he's trying to tell us." I examined Jake carefully. There was nothing physically wrong with his throat or vocal cords. He could breathe normally, swallow, even cough. But when he tried to speak, nothing happened. It was as if his voice had simply disappeared. That night, I set up my equipment closer to the stone formation than ever before. I wanted to record everything: the singing, the seismic activity, any electromagnetic anomalies. As the temperature dropped toward freezing, I felt a strange tingling sensation in my throat, like the feeling you get before you lose your voice to a cold. The singing started earlier this time, around 11 o'clock. But now I could make out individual words in Cherokee. Words about dying far from home. Words about children who would never see their families again. Words about the long walk that ended in death for so many. As I listened, I began to understand what my grandmother had tried to tell me. These weren't just random voices singing together. These were the actual final words of Cherokee people who had died on this mountain over a century ago. Somehow, the unique quartzite formations had acted like natural recording devices, capturing and preserving their voices in the stone itself. But that raised a terrifying question. If Jake had lost his voice after working near the stones, and if the voices in the stone were growing stronger every night, what exactly were these formations doing to living people? I was about to find out. Over the next few days, 3 more construction workers lost their voices. They could make gestures, write notes, even whisper faintly, but their normal speaking voices were gone. The crew was getting scared, talking about quitting the job and Dios. Ving the bridge half built. I spent every night up there with my equipment, recording hours of the singing and trying to understand how the phenomenon worked. The pattern was becoming clear. The stones only sang when the temperature dropped below freezing, and the singing was getting louder and more complex each night. New voices were being added to the chorus. On Thursday night, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Mixed in with the ancient Cherokee death songs was a more recent voice, a man singing "Take Me Home, Country Roads" in a thick West Virginia accent. I recognized the voice immediately. It was Bobby Fletcher, a bridge worker who had fallen from the construction site 6 months ago and died on the rocks below. The stones weren't just preserving voices from the 1830s. They were collecting every voice that was silenced near the formation, adding them to their eternal chorus. And somehow, they were taking voices from living people too. Friday night, I decided to test my theory. I brought a small portable heater and set it up next to my recording equipment, keeping the area around me above freezing while the rest of the mountain got cold. When the singing started, I felt that tingling sensation in my throat again, but it was weaker this time. The warmth seemed to provide some protection. Through my headphones, I could hear the voices more clearly than ever before. The Cherokee voices were the foundation. Dozens of men, women, and children who had died during the forced relocation. But layered over them were more recent additions. Hikers who had gotten lost and died of exposure. People who had committed suicide by jumping from the mountain's cliffs. Accident victims like Bobby Fletcher. And then I heard something that made me rip off my headphones and scramble backward from the stone formation. My great-grandmother's voice. She had died when I was 7, years old, but I remembered her voice perfectly. She used to sing Cherokee lullabies to me when I visited. Now her voice was part of the stone chorus, singing the same death songs as all the Kishiutio, others. According to family stories, she had died of pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter, but now I wondered if she might have died somewhere near this mountain. Maybe she had been one of the stone's victims, taken decades before I was even born. As I sat there shivering in the cold air, I realized the full horror of what was happening. The stones weren't just passively recording voices. They were actively hunting them, drawing people to the formation and stealing their ability to speak. The construction project had disturbed their rest and awakened their hunger. That's when I noticed the figures. At first, I thought they were just tricks of moonlight and shadow, but as my eyes adjusted, I could see them clearly. Translucent human shapes standing among the stone formation, their mouths open as if singing. There were dozens of them, Cherokee people in traditional dress, modern hikers in jeans and flannel shirts, construction workers in hard hats. All of them were singing silently, their voices trapped in the stones, while their spirits remained bound to the mountain. I tried to back away slowly, but my feet seemed rooted to the ground. The tingling in my throat was getting stronger despite the heater. The stones were calling to me, demanding that I add my voice to their collection. I could feel my grandmother's presence among the spirits, beckoning me to join her in their eternal song. Fighting against the compulsion, I forced myself to move. I grabbed my essential equipment and stumbled back toward my truck, leaving most of my gear behind. The singing followed me as I drove down the mountain, echoing in my head long after I should have been out of range. Saturday morning, I called the construction company and told them to keep their workers away from the stone formation until I could figure out what to do. But when I arrived at the site that afternoon, I found the entire crew gathered around the stones in a circle, staring at the formation with the same blank expression I'd seen on Jake's face. "Get away from there!" I shouted, but none of them responded. They just stood there, motionless, as if waiting for something. As the sun set and the temperature began to drop, I understood what they were waiting for. The stones were calling to them, just as they had called to me the night before. But unlike me, these men had no protection, no understanding of what they were facing. The singing started early that evening, and this time it wasn't coming just from the stones. The construction workers opened their mouths and began to sing along, their voices joining the ancient chorus. But as they sang, their voices grew fainter and fainter, as if the sound was being pulled out of their throats and absorbed into the quartzite formation. I tried to break the spell by shouting at them, shaking them, even slapping one man across the face. Nothing worked. They were completely entranced, feeding their voices to the hungry stones while their spirits were slowly being bound to the mountain forever. That's when I remembered my grandmother's Cherokee protection chants. I started singing the old Cherokee songs my grandmother had taught me, not death songs, but life songs, songs of protection and blessing, songs that called on the spirits of our ancestors to watch over the living. The effect was immediate. The construction workers blinked and looked around in confusion, as if waking up from a dream. Their voices were weak, but they could speak again. The stone's hold on them had been broken, at least temporarily. "Run!" I shouted. "Get to your trucks and get off this mountain." Most of them didn't need to be told twice. They stumbled toward the parking area, helping each other walk. But 3 men remained frozen in place, their eyes rolled back in two, their heads as their voices continued to be drawn into the stone formation. I kept singing the protection chants while I approached the stones. The translucent figures were more visible now, and I could see the pain in their faces. They weren't evil spirits trying to harm the living. They were trapped souls who couldn't move on to the spirit world because their voices were imprisoned in the quartzite. The stones themselves were glowing with a faint blue light, pulsing in rhythm with the singing. I could feel their power pulling at my own voice, trying to add it to their collection. But the protection chants created a barrier around me, keeping me safe as long as I kept singing. Then I heard my great-grandmother's voice speaking directly to me, not singing with the chorus, but talking in the Cherokee language she had taught me as a child. "Little Beth," she said, "you must finish what we could not. The ritual was interrupted when we died. The stones were meant to preserve our voices until our people could return and release them properly. But we died too soon, and our spirits became trapped here." I understood then. The stone formation wasn't a natural phenomenon or an ancient Cherokee construction site. It was a spiritual trap, created during the Trail of Tears to preserve the voices and memories of the people who were being forced from their homeland. But the ritual had never been completed because too many people died before they could finish it. The stones had been corrupted over the years, turning from a preservation tool into a predatory force that consumed voices from anyone who came too close. The construction project had awakened them and made them stronger, but it had also created an opportunity to finally complete the original ritual and set the trapped spirits free. "Tell me what to do," I whispered, still fighting against the stone's pull on my own voice. My great-grandmother's spirit pointed toward the center of the formation, where the largest quartzite stone stood like an altar. "Sing the completion song, but beware, the stones will try to take. It's your voice before you can finish. You must be strong enough to resist them until the ritual is done. I approached the central stone, feeling the full power of the formation focused on me. The blue glow intensified, and I could see all the trapped spirits more clearly now. Cherokee families who had died together during the forced march. Recent victims like Bobby Fletcher and the missing hikers. Even the 3 construction workers who were still frozen in place. I began to sing the completion song my great-grandmother whispered to me, but the stones fought back immediately. The pressure on my throat was incredible, as if invisible hands were squeezing my vocal cords. The song came out as barely a whisper, and I could feel my voice being drawn away with each word. The stone formation began to vibrate, creating harmonic frequencies that interfered with my singing. I switched tactics, using my knowledge of geology and acoustics to find the exact pitch and frequency that would resonate with the quartzite. Instead of fighting the stone's natural harmonic properties, I worked with them, turning their own power against the corruption that had twisted their original purpose. The singing grew louder as more spirits joined in, but now they were helping me instead of fighting me. The Cherokee voices provided the foundation, while my voice carried the completion ritual. The stone's blue glow began to shift to white, then to gold, as the spiritual trap transformed back into its original form. But the effort was killing me. I could feel my own life force being drawn into the ritual, my voice becoming part of the final completion song. Just as I was about to collapse, I felt hands supporting me. Not physical hands, but spiritual ones. My great-grandmother and all the other trapped souls were lending me their strength for one final push. I sang the last words of the completion song with everything I had left, and the mountain exploded with light. When I woke up, I was lying on the ground 50 feet from the stone formation. The sun was rising, and the construction workers were standing around me with worried expressions. They could all speak normally again, though they claimed they couldn't remember anything after Friday afternoon. The stones were still there, but they looked different now. The geometric patterns remained, but the quartzite had changed color from dark gray to pure white. There was no more blue glow, no more harmonic vibrations. The formation felt peaceful now, like a proper memorial instead of a spiritual trap. My voice came back gradually over the next few days, but it was forever changed. When I spoke, there was an echo underneath my words. Not audible to most people, but I could hear it. The voices of my Cherokee ancestors, speaking through me in whispers. The construction company declared the site geologically unstable and rerouted the bridge project around the stone formation. Tons of fill dirt were brought in to bury the stones, officially to prevent rock slides, but really to make sure no one would disturb them again. I wrote a detailed report about the incident, though I left out most of the supernatural elements. Officially, the construction workers had suffered from some kind of mass hysteria brought on by acoustic phenomena and environmental stress. The report was filed away and forgotten, but I kept copies of all my recordings and research. If there are other Cherokee sacred sites in these mountains, sites where spiritual rituals were interrupted by tragedy, then other people might face the same danger I encountered on Grandfather Mountain. Sometimes on quiet nights when the wind blows through the mountains just right, I can still hear the singing. But it's different now. Instead of death songs and mourning chants, the voices sing songs of gratitude and farewell. The Cherokee spirits have finally completed their journey to the spirit world, and the stones have returned to their original purpose as a Kaful memorial. I still work as a ranger in these mountains, but I pay closer attention to the old Cherokee stories my grandmother told me. Some things can't be explained by geology textbooks or scientific instruments. Some mysteries require a different kind of knowledge. The wisdom of our ancestors who understood that the boundary between the living world and the spirit world is thinner than most people realize. The singing stones of Grandfather Mountain are quiet now, but they're still there under all that fill dirt. Still remembering. Still keeping watch over the place where so many of our people died far from home. And sometimes, when I'm alone on the mountain doing my rounds, I swear I can hear my great-grandmother's voice carried on the wind, thanking me for helping her and all the others find their way home at last. My name is Elizabeth Morrison, And this is the story I've never told anyone. Until now. The stones remember everything. And so do I. My name is Jim Millwood, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years now. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened up at Devil's Creek in November of '76. The papers said it was a mining accident. The Park Service called it a landslide, but I was there, and I know the truth. I grew up in these mountains. My daddy worked the coal mines until a cave-in took his life when I was 16. After that, I swore I'd never go underground again. Being a ranger seemed like the perfect job, keeping people safe in the open air, under blue skies, where a man can breathe. Devil's Creek Hollow sits way up in the Monongahela National Forest, about 23 miles from the nearest town. It's beautiful country, I'll give it that. Pine trees so thick they block out most of the sun, and a little creek that runs crystal clear down the mountainside. But it's got a dark history. The old coal company worked those hills from the 1920s right up until 1943. Then something happened down in the mines, an explosion that killed 47 men. The company sealed up all the tunnels real quick and left town, never even tried to get the bodies out. Said it was too dangerous. My grandmother used to tell stories about hollow men, miners who died underground and came back wrong. She said they wandered the mountains at night, looking for fresh workers to join them down in the dark. I never believed those old tales. Figured they were just stories to keep kids from playing near the mine entrances. Looking back, I wish I'd listened. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came in. The weather had been strange that week, warm for November, warm enough to melt most of the early snow. The ground was soft and muddy, and you could hear water running everywhere as the snowmelt found its way downhill. "We got a missing persons report," Sheriff Davies told me over the radio. Family of hikers, mom, dad, and 2 teenagers. Last seen heading up Devil's Creek Trail 3 days ago. Supposed to check in with relatives yesterday but never called. I loaded up my truck with the usual gear. First aid kit, ropes, Coleman lantern, my .38 revolver, and enough supplies for a couple days if needed. The radio kept cutting in and out as I drove up the mountain road. These mountains play hell with radio signals. The hikers' campsite was easy to find. Their orange dome tent sat in a little clearing about 2 miles up the trail, right next to the creek. But something felt wrong the moment I stepped out of my truck. The forest was too quiet. I've spent most of my life in these woods, and they're never completely silent. There should be birds singing, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. But I couldn't hear anything except the creek gurgling over the rocks and my own footsteps on the wet leaves. Their camp looked normal enough at first glance. Tent was still up, sleeping bags laid out inside, a ring of stones around cold ashes where they'd had a fire, backpacks propped against a fallen log. But no people. That's when I noticed their clothes. A man's flannel shirt hung from a tree branch like someone had just taken it off. A woman's jacket lay crumpled on the ground next to the tent. Kids' sneakers sat by the water's edge, socks still tucked inside them. All scattered around like people had just stepped out of them. But there was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no torn fabric or drag marks, nothing that made any sense. I called out their names, the Hendersons, according to the missing persons report. My voice echoed off the hills, but nobody answered back. That's when I heard the tapping. It was faint at first, like someone hammering nails way off in the distance. But as I stood there listening, it got clearer, rhythmic, steady, like the sound of pickaxes hitting rock. The sound was coming from underground. I followed it to the base of a steep hillside about 50 yards from the campsite. There, hidden behind some scraggly bushes, I found something that made my blood run cold. One of the old mine entrances had cracked open. The rusty iron gate that was supposed to keep people out hung twisted on its hinges. Fresh dirt and rocks were scattered around the opening like something had pushed through from the inside. The tapping was louder here, definitely coming from deep in the mine shaft. I should have radioed for backup right then. That was the smart thing to do. But I could hear what sounded like voices echoing up from below, weak, desperate voices calling for help. If the Henderson family was down there, Every minute counted. I clicked on my Coleman lantern and squeezed through the broken gate. The tunnel slanted downward at a steep angle. The air smelled like coal dust and something else, something rotten and sweet that made my stomach turn. My lantern beam didn't reach very far in the thick darkness. The walls were carved from solid rock, black with decades of coal soot. Old wooden support beams sagged overhead, and I could hear water dripping somewhere ahead. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was bouncing off walls that weren't quite where they should be. The tapping got louder as I went deeper, and I started to hear other sounds too. Men coughing, the scrape of shovels, the creak of minecart wheels. It sounded like a whole crew was working somewhere in the tunnels ahead. But that was impossible. These mines had been sealed for over 30 years. I must have walked for 20 minutes before I found the first body. It was lying in a side tunnel, curled up like it was sleeping. Even in the lantern light, I could see it was one of the missing hikers, a teenage boy, based on his size and clothes. I knelt down and checked for a pulse, but his skin was ice cold, and completely white, not pale, white like paper, like all the blood had been drained right out of him. His eyes were open, and butt clouded over, staring at nothing. There were no wounds I could see, no cuts or bruises. He just looked empty. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, raising my lantern high. For just a second, I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the light, a thin figure in old work clothes. But when I blinked, it was gone. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just the echo of my own voice bouncing off the tunnel walls. I tried my radio, but all I got was static mixed with that weird tapping sound. The noise seemed to be coming from the radio itself now, like it was picking up some kind of signal from deep in the mines. I kept walking, following the main tunnel deeper into the mountain. The sounds of working men got louder. Picks hitting rock, cartwheels rolling, voices calling to each other in words I couldn't quite make out. But every time I thought I was getting close, the sounds would seem to move further away. The tunnel branched off in different directions, creating a maze of passages that twisted and turned through the rock. I tried to mark my path with chalk, but when I looked back, the marks seemed to have moved to different walls. That's when I started to realize the truth about this place. The mine wasn't just old, it was wrong. The tunnels seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. Distances that should have taken 5 minutes to walk stretched on for 20. And those sounds of working miners were getting closer. I found the second body in what looked like an old equipment room. This one was an adult woman, probably Mrs. Henderson. Same white, drained appearance, same empty stare. But this time, I noticed something else. Black dust around her mouth and nose. Coal dust, but darker than any I'd ever seen. And when I looked closer, I could see it moving slightly, like it was still alive. That is when I heard breathing behind me. I turned around slowly, keeping my hand on my gun. There in the doorway stood a man in old mining clothes, canvas pants, heavy boots, a dented hard hat, with a carbide lamp. His skin was white as bone, and where his eyes should have been, there were just dark holes filled with that same black dust. He didn't move for the longest time, just stood there watching me with those empty sockets. Then he opened his mouth and coal dust poured out like water. "New worker," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "Good. We need new workers." I drew my gun and fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets went right through him like he was made of fog and sparked off the rock wall behind. He didn't even flinch. That's when I ran. I ran through those tunnels like the devil himself was chasing me. But no matter which way I turned, I couldn't find the entrance. Every passage looked the same in my lantern light. Black rock walls, sagging wooden beams, and that awful smell getting stronger. Behind me I could hear footsteps, lots of them, and voices calling out in that grinding, dusty language I was starting to understand wasn't English at all. It was the sound of rock being crushed, of air being squeezed out of dying lungs. I ducked into a side tunnel and pressed myself against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. Through the darkness, I could see lights moving in the main passage, not electric lights, but the flickering yellow glow of old carbide lamps. The light stopped right outside my hiding spot. "Smells like fear," said a voice. "Fresh fear. Been too long since we had fresh fear." "Surface dweller," said another. "Came looking for the others. Should we take him now?" "No," said a third voice, deeper and more worn than the others. "Let him see first. Let him understand what he's dealing with. Fear makes them easier to convert." The lights moved on, but I waited a long time before I dared to move. When I finally crept out of my hiding place, I could still hear them working. Somewhere deeper in the mine. That endless tapping and scraping and coughing. I had to find the other missing hikers and get us all out of there. But first I needed to understand what I was up against. I followed a tunnel that seemed to angle upward, hoping it would lead back to the surface. Instead, it opened into a huge underground chamber lit by dozens of carbide lamps. What I saw there will haunt me for the rest of my life. The whole space was full of them, hollow men in mining clothes from different eras. Some wore the canvas and leather of the 1940s. Others had newer work boots and hard hats. All of them had that same white, drained skin and those terrible empty eyes filled with black dust. They were working, mining coal from veins in the rock walls, loading it into carts, hauling it through tunnels that seemed to stretch on forever. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions like puppets being controlled by invisible strings. And in the center of the chamber, chained to wooden posts, were the remaining members of the Henderson family. Mr. Henderson was barely conscious, his skin starting to turn that awful white color. His wife was completely still, staring at nothing, while black dust trickled from her nose. But their teenage daughter was still awake, still fighting, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her parents slowly transform into something else. I had to get them out of there. I worked my way around the edge of the chamber, staying in the shadows. The hollow men seemed focused on their work, but every now and then one would look up and scan the darkness with those dust-filled sockets. I was almost to the prisoners when something grabbed my ankle. I looked down to see a hollow man that must have been lying flat against the tunnel floor. His grip was like iron, and when he opened his mouth to call out, that black dust came pouring out like smoke. "Ki!" I stomped on his face with my free boot, and he let go with a sound like breaking glass. But the damage was done. Every hollow man in the chamber turned to look at me. "Surface dweller," one of them shouted. "He's here for the fresh ones." They came at me from all directions, moving with that terrible jerky speed. I ran for the prisoners, pulling out my pocket knife to cut their ropes. The girl, she couldn't have been more than 16, looked at me with desperate hope. "Please," she whispered, "don't let me become like them." I cut her free first, then started working on her father's ropes. But the hollow men were getting closer, and I could hear more coming from the tunnels around us. That's when I noticed something. These creatures avoided the brightest areas around the carbide lamps. They stuck to the shadows, the dim spaces between the pools of light. "Stay in the light," I told the girl as I freed her father. "They don't like bright light." But Mr. Henderson was too far gone. His skin was white as milk, and when he opened his eyes, I could see black dust starting to fill them. He tried to speak, but only made that grinding, crushing sound. "Dad?" the girl cried. "Dad, can you hear me?" He looked at her for a moment, and I could see him fighting against whatever was happening to him. Then he spoke, and his voice was almost human. "Run," he whispered. "Run, before they make you like us." That's when the hollow men reached us. They surrounded us in seconds, moving faster than anything human should be able to move. Up close, I could see they weren't completely solid. Their bodies seemed to be made of coal dust held together by some kind of terrible will. When they moved, little clouds of black powder fell from them like dry skin. 47 of us died here," said the one who seemed to be their leader. His hard hat was older than the others, and his clothes looked like they were from the 1940s. 47 of us trapped when the company set off their charges, left us to suffocate in the dark. He stepped closer, and I could smell the grave on it. Old death and coal dust and something else that made my stomach turn. "But we didn't stay dead," he continued. "The mountain wouldn't let us rest. Too much coal in our lungs, too much anger in our hearts. So we keep working, always working. building new tunnels, finding new seams, preparing for the day we can return to the surface. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Workers," he said simply. "Fresh workers to help us dig. The mountain is full of coal, but we need living hands to mine it, living lungs to breathe the dust until it changes them." I looked around at the other hollow men. Some of them looked familiar, faces I'd seen in old newspapers, miners who'd gone missing over the years. Others were more recent, wearing clothes from the 1960s and 70s. "You've been taking people all along," I said. "1 or 2 every few years," the leader nodded. "Never enough to draw attention. Always making it look like accidents. But now we're ready for more, ready to expand our operations." He gestured toward the tunnels, and I could see they stretched much further than I'd thought. Some of them angled upward, heading toward the surface. They'd been digging for 30 years, slowly working their way toward the towns below. "Your friend here will make a fine addition to our crew," the leader said, pointing at Mr. Henderson. "He's already breathing the dust, already feeling the change. Soon he'll understand the joy of eternal work." Mr. Henderson tried to stand up, moving with the same jerky motions as the other hollow men. His daughter screamed and tried to hold him back, but he was getting stronger as the transformation took hold. That's when I remembered something from my childhood. My grandmother's stories about the hollow men weren't just scary tales. They were warnings, and warnings usually came with solutions. "Fire," I whispered. She said that. They were afraid of fire. I pulled out my Coleman lantern and unscrewed the fuel cap. White gas sloshed around inside. Enough to make a decent explosion if I could figure out how to light it. "What are you doing, surface dweller?" the leader asked, stepping closer. "Something I should have done the moment I found this place," I said. I smashed the lantern against the rock wall. Fuel splashed everywhere, filling the air with sharp chemical smell. The hollow men backed away, their empty eye sockets somehow managing to look worried. I pulled out a book of matches, the kind every ranger carries for emergency fires. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely strike one, but finally it caught. "You don't understand," the leader said, his voice getting desperate. "If you destroy this place, we'll be trapped forever, sealed in the dark with no way out." "Good," I said, and dropped the match. The explosion knocked me backward, and for a moment everything was bright orange flame and billowing smoke. The hollow men screamed, not with voices, but with the sound of coal dust being scattered by the wind. When the fire died down, most of them were gone, just empty clothes and piles of black dust on the tunnel floor. But the leader was still there, his form wavering like heat shimmer. "This won't end it," he said. "There are other mines, other places where we've been working. You can't seal us all away." Then he faded into nothing, leaving only the smell of smoke and coal dust. I grabbed the Henderson girl and what was left of her father and ran for the surface. The tunnels were collapsing behind us, wooden beams cracking and rocks falling from the ceiling. But somehow, maybe because the hollow men's influence was breaking, I could finally find the way out. We made it to the entrance just as the whole hillside came down, sealing the mine forever. The official report said it was a landslide caused by the unusual weather. The mining company, what was left of it after all these years, paid to have the whole area declared geologically unstable. Signs went up warning G people to stay away. The Henderson girl survived, but she never really got over what happened to her family. Last I heard, she'd moved to California, as far from these mountains as she could get. Can't say I blame her. As for me, I couldn't handle being underground after that. Even basement storage rooms made me break out in a cold sweat. I transferred to a park in Arizona where everything is open desert and blue sky as far as you can see. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing just right, I swear I can still hear that tapping, the sound of pickaxes hitting rock echoing up from somewhere deep beneath the ground. And I know I'm not the only one who's heard it. There have been other incidents over the years. Miners going missing in Pennsylvania. Hikers vanishing in old coal country throughout Appalachia. Always the same pattern. People disappearing near abandoned mines, their belongings left behind like they just stepped out of their lives. The coal companies and park services always have explanations. Cave-ins, wild animals, people just wandering off and getting lost. But I know better. They're still down there, in mines scattered throughout these mountains, still digging, still working, still waiting for fresh recruits to join their eternal workforce. So if you ever find yourself hiking in coal country, stay away from the old mine entrances. Don't follow strange sounds underground. And if you hear that rhythmic tapping echoing up from below, turn around and walk away as fast as you can. Because the hollow men are always looking for new workers. And once you go down into their darkness, you might never come back up. My name is Jim Millwood, and that's my story. I'm telling it now because I'm getting old, and someone needs to know the truth about Devil's Creek. Someone needs to be watching those old mines, because I have a feeling the hollow men aren't done with us yet.